Well, thank you all for taking the time to look at this. I hope you enjoy it. I get puzzled looks sometimes when I advertise this presentation, but you'll shortly see why, and Bill has alluded to some of the reasons for that. Here we are. It's April 16th. I hope everybody get their taxes filed and is getting back and are getting back lots of money, but that's done now, right? I'll quote from this famous philosopher, basically Paul Simon. Everything looks worse in black and white. So we're not going to see artistic black and white photography tonight. There will be some Kodochromes here. And the other thing I want to do though is I don't like overregulation myself, but I want to warn you, there's a health alert here. Eye candy is ahead. Or let's summarize it in a format I think we're probably all familiar with. The presentation is the serving size. This has enough added sugars in the form of eye candy you don't want to know. The good news, there are no trans fats. So without further ado, let me talk a little bit about my personal photo history. The first time I ever saw a Norfolk Southern unit and photographed it was down when I was living in the Atlanta area in the 1980s. In 1984, March specifically, March 25th. This is just outside of north of Atlanta at Norcross. And here in all its, well, it's already got quite a bit of road grime on it, is an NS Pony. Notice the Southern is running manifest freights with 4 axles here exclusively, at least on this train, but that was a fairly common practice there. This is one of their GP50s in what's been referred to as the tuxedo scheme, heading up the consist. There was a little color back then in the form of the former Southern Railway F units that were used for executive services and occasional fan trips. This is one of the latter, which ran for the Heart of Dixie chapter, I'm sorry, the Huntsville chapter, between Huntsville and Chattanooga. This is west of Chattanooga in a place called Lake Nickajack, with the dam of the same name in the background. These were a sight for sore eyes by the 80s. There weren't a lot of, there were a lot of passenger trains besides Amtrak, although the Southern still had theirs. And F units were getting a little bit scarce, at least on class ones. Let's begin this with what is often referred to in railfan circles as foreign power. That is, locomotives of other railroads that appear on the one in question. What was going to become a major feature at the time I moved to the DC area, living in Northern Virginia in the fall of 1989, Conrail units began to show up because this was the switch from operating via Potomac Yard to the northeast to operating via Harrisburg and Hagerstown and the NSB line. This would become a staple, but this was actually the first trip of what later became train 211, and today is 25A. At this point, it was operating only between North New Jersey and Manassas, where its traffic was inserted in train 221. I was out chasing the 1218 that day, and this one showed up, and it was literally brand new. Here are a couple of their, I think these are B40-8s. This was a feature on the southern side in the Northern Virginia area for several years around 1990. Run through train 341 and its counterpart in the other direction, 342, that used Susquehanna power. I was chasing this with my young son. It had started out cloudy. We could see the sucker holes to the south, and yeah, like fools, we proceeded, but we eventually got lucky and found a little bit of sun. This is in an area south of Bealton that's in between Bealton and Remington that's referred to as Lucky Hill. Now, one of the more interesting parts about this was apparently the rear unit was not loading. And the crew was on the radio trying to figure out, they didn't know what it was. Their best guess was, oh, this must be one of those Amtrak units. Well, in fact, it was an SD45 in a cow, so they did have the horsepower to do it, but I'm not sure I think they learned that more by the fact that the train wasn't stalling on the hills. For a brief period, the American Orient Express, I think it also operated under another name, also ran on the Southern. This is, it came on, it was using a seaboard system, no, it was B-36 with a Mark unit for head-end power. This is on the Southern, not far from the shot at Lucky Hill. Later, that operation morphed into the Greenbrier Limited. The idea being it ran on the Cardinal line to get people, particularly to and from the Northeast, to the Greenbrier Resort in Lewisburg, West Virginia. Here it is coming through Manassas, of course, without stopping. By then, they were using the former New York Central Sandy Creek as their observation lounge. Of course, this is now Wick Mormon's car. And here it is passing the Manassas station. Well, Train 341 was, this is about its colorful peak, accompanied by some good fall foliage. This is down just west of Springfield, Virginia. The Lake Accotink Dam is just out of sight behind this trestle. And we've got CP lease units and actually a single Norfolk Southern in the company colors. Well, as things progressed with using the B-line routing, Conrail units began to show up more and more. This one, of course, is actually coming up the historic H line from Roanoke. It's at a place called Gaylord, which is basically about 200 feet in 200 or 300 feet in back of me is the West Virginia state line. This is the northernmost point on the NS in the state of Virginia. And here it's got loaded coal train number 568. Road railers were extant then on the Norfolk Southern. There was an awful lot of run-through power from Conrail, particularly this was the era of the famous bathroom debate, where the Norfolk Southern had removed or disabled toilets on many of its locomotives. The state of Pennsylvania forbade that. So Conrail units at one point led all the through trains. Here's one on road railer number 266 at the same location, Gaylord, and you can see a Christmas tree farm in the background here. Now this, to use ZZ Top's term sharp-dressed man up front, is a relatively new, I can't remember if this is an SD50 or 60, but this was the only time I actually observed a Santa Fe Kodachrome unit from the ill-fated Southern Pacific Santa Fe, also known as Shouldn't Paint So Fast. This is on Manifest Train 456 near the Manassas Airport on the railroad at South Manassas, where the VRE layover yard is. Canadian Pacific units continue to show up. There's a Susquehanna back here as well. What happened to that northbound signal, I don't know, but it better be careful it's not hauled in for DUI, because it's certainly giving that appearance. This is down in the area between Lynchburg and Charlotte, 342, the 341's counterpart in the other direction in the morning in August 1997 at a place called Shipment. This is actually near Lovingston, which is the county seat of Nelson County. At that point, I think Nelson at that point still utterly lacked traffic lights, and not until recently, they may have several now, but at one point, this rural county between Charlottesville and Lynchburg had a total of one stoplight on US 29. Here's CP, Conrail, and BN with the home road unit banished to the 4th position, coming past Nokesville south of Manassas. Never saw other Sioux units on the NS at this point. Was lucky to get this one. This is out at the, I was there yesterday chasing the heritage units on the NS OCS. It was nice to run into Bill and Jim and Don for that matter. You can just barely make out the Purina sign that's on that old grain elevator at Marshall here. They were actually setting off, I think, a bad order car here. They're in the siding, which doesn't get used very much. This is now the site. It's a place called Milner, but this is, I'm standing where a portion of the NS intermodal yard is here. This is a lease locomotive, obviously with some Conrail background that GE was now leasing to the NS. This was a little bit of a surprise in terms of being totally Union Pacific. As you'll see, a fair amount of UP even leading shows up. Well, this must have excited the cows no end, because you can see they're all fleeing from it. Here's a lease unit at Glasgow, Virginia. This is actually where the interchange is between the former CNO, CSX, and the NW's H line. The CNO calls their location, which is about a quarter mile to the right. Balcony Falls, is we all pronounce it that way, but the old railroaders would tell us it's Balcony.
Sad to see the Balcony Falls station raised.
Yes, very. Of course, the coal tower continues to stand, because that's expensive to raise.
Right.
And would probably tie up things for several days. Now, this gave the immediate impression of all ex-Conrail. You can see these units are patched. They've got the white surrounds for the numbers. But then there's a leaser in the middle, and it's pretty close to Conrail paint as well. This is between Lynchburg and Charlottesville at a place called Hamlin, which is the end of double track. This used to be the division point at Monroe, or as the locals call that, Monroe. It's barely a wide spot in the railroad now. Where those ties are was basically where the station and office were. The crescent into Amtrak continued to stop there. That was a crew change point. But by the 2000s, everything is basically gone.
Used to be a YMCA there for the crews to stay, I think, division point. Yeah.
Yes. Here's another colorful ash up. BNSF, both pumpkin colors and old BN with a Conrail SD back there. This is still a great spot for afternoon shots on the westbounds on the B line. It's right near a recycling location, which gives you a little place to pull off as well. Once in a while, you'll see CSX units pulling their own trains on the NS. Anybody recall the problem with the movable bridge in Northeast DC that got out of whack back in, this was 2006. Well, the CSX had to detour its priority trains on the NS using pilots. And that's the NS number. This probably would have been the 175 back then, Q175. KCS units would show up from time to time. And of course, once the colorful retro bells showed up, that was even better. But here's one on NS 203 at the then crew change point at Bristow. This is a beautiful place south of Front Royal called Limetown. And you got a beautiful view of the west side of the Blue Ridge there. A nice cattle farm here with a UP leader, SD72. SD70M. This is in the, it's south of the Midwest because it's in Kentucky. This is on the former CNO and TP. You'll note that there's a boxcar signal bridge back there, but on the CNO and TP, the targets were single indications rather than the three lights that we had on the former Southern Main Line between Washington and Atlanta. This is at a double crossover at a place called Blanchette, Kentucky.
You know where those Union Pacific diesels originated?
No, they would be, many of the times they were on a train coming from or going to Atlanta. But they would appear randomly, particularly coming out of the north. In other words, something, NS got a hold of a unit and decided to send it various places. No, it rarely knew anything about why they were there. Well, here's Big Orange at Orange. This is the old signal bridge, which of course has now been replaced. But this was a nice opportunity to incorporate the color there before that happened. Canadian National units, I haven't seen many recently, but there was a period of time when you saw them very frequently. The White Post Depot, as many of you know, still stands. It's simply a little more dilapidated. Ever since I've lived up here, which is 4 years now, there's talk of the people in the town. They've rehabbed the old Sinclair gas station. There's been talk about doing that for the White Post Depot, but we haven't seen any activity yet. These guys are on their way to Streamliners at Spencer. Ex-New Haven FL9, Pan Am Railways Executive Unit, and I guess this was the former New York and Greenwood Lake Erie Railroad. NS actually seemed to care about this. They assigned 2 freight units to haul these 3 dead in tow. Now, as we got closer to Streamliners at Spencer, and I was on my way down there, this is Bennett Levin's contribution, his 2 E8s and his 3 passenger cars passing through Orange. This could be almost a timeless scene from the 50s, except nobody had cell phones or took selfies back then, but it was still a good opportunity, so I took it. This is out in Ohio, a place called Vermilion, which is just, the town is on Lake Erie. The railroad is actually begun to go inland again here. This is the Chicago line. It's a great place for traffic volume. And then you can see the H2 and the later BNSF scheme with the swoosh here on a westbound. James River Bridge north of Lynchburg provided a great opportunity one afternoon. Here's a leaser, a pretty beat up Santa Fe war bonnet, and an NS unit on Manifest 12R. It was followed by Intermodal Train 212 with a different color lease unit and a UP in the 3rd position. Yes, we did get some retro bells while they were still around. I guess they're still running, but the chances are getting to be fewer and fewer. I didn't know if I was going to get light on the nose here, but it worked and I was pleased. This is a place called Mitchell's, which is between Winston and Rapidan, south of Culpeper. It is a racetrack, particularly for southbound passenger trains. But here's a UP duo on Manifest Train 36Q in June of 2015. This was when they were running the alcohol train that actually made it all the way up to Alexandria. And here it is at Burke, Virginia, behind a CP leader. Now here is the southern Washington Atlanta version of the Boxcar Bridge with three indications. 211. As you can see here, there's still a pretty good slug of trailer traffic back in 2015. CSX Power actually showed up. This is a reverse move of crude oil that for some reason went down the H line in west from Roanoke. There may have been a crew issue. You'll note that there are no Norfolk Southern locomotives in this lash up at all. And this is after the highway bridge at the Compton Trestle was raised from its earlier lower elevation. Here's the same train coming through Luray. Light got a little better as the day went on. Not long after that, was fortunate enough to catch a CSX EMD at the color position light signals at Vaughan, which is the other end of the siding between Summit and Vaughan, south of Front Royal. Yes, it's colorful. I mean, technically, this has got a Norfolk Southern association, but it is owned now by the Virginia Transportation Museum. When it was rehabbed for excursion service back in the mid 20-teens, here it is making its first appearance in Northern Virginia. It's on its way to spend the night at Manassas before running a series of excursions. Well, sometimes you see, as they say, visitors from afar. There was a period of time when GE was exporting locomotives principally to Europe, but also even places like Indonesia and Africa via the port of Virginia down in Hampton Roads. And we were seeing them coming down from Harrisburg. They came down, from Erie, Pennsylvania. We'd see them come down from Harrisburg and then cut over at Lynchburg to the coast. Here it is just north of Culpeper at Inlet. Oops, too fast here. Here's a Ferromex GE west of Rectortown. And just to the right now, there's the bridge over Goose Creek is currently out of service. So if you're chasing, and I suspect people have found this out recently, you can get to Rectortown from either side, but you can't go through it at this point. This is also a neat location because the railroad bends around. It is heading close to south. So most of the year, this is a place you can actually get light on the nose of an eastbound on the B line in the afternoon. Here are some Indonesian export units. This was after they lengthened the siding between Berryville and Audley, and for a while, they got rid of all the foliage. It grew back quickly, unfortunately. This very colorful export unit was the very first one. GE was going to build, I think, the first 50 or 100 of these in the US for the railways in India. And this was the very first one on its way to be shipped. And then the rest were going to be assembled in India. UP, a BC rail unit. This again is west of Rectortown. I haven't seen many UP heritage units in our region, but it was nice of them to send the Rio Grande, which was good looking and at least fairly clean. This is just west of Manassas, and it's entered onto the B line. Nice city rails around a CN. This is a place. It's the Baptist Church in Calverton, and you can walk to the back. But again, foliage is growing here rapidly, unfortunately. This was a really great event. NS Manifest 16T is putting its train back together to depart Shenandoah for Hagerstown and points north behind a pair of retro bells. By the afternoon, they had made it all the way to Audley, where they're waiting in the siding for 203. And here is the meet. And for a bonus, we've got a UP trailing the two NS leaders on 203. Here's another stray CSX leader coming through Rectortown. The bridge, which I know a number of people, including probably some of you listening, have used in the last 2 times the NS has run the heritage units on the OCS. That's a former BN unit now gone back to CIT leasing. This is the Sandusky Bay Bridge over an arm of Lake Erie between Sandusky and Port Clinton, Ohio on the Chicago line. This is westbound crude oil empties going back to the back in oil fields on the CP. A Helm leasing unit on what was largely a tri-level auto rack train coming up from South Carolina. That traffic has now been incorporated in other movements. This is the CSX local that after the CSX abandoned its street running in Chambersburg, they now have to get to the Letterkenny Arsenal at Shippensburg. They have to run up the NS from Hagerstown. At that point, they have to go east over to CP Lee's in Lee's Crossroads, where this picture is, to reverse to get back into Letterkenny. This on the Norfolk Southern is symboled KH00. There's another relatively colorful, plus some fall foliage on the Compton Trestle in the morning, coming up on NS12Z. Now, one of my good rail fan friends in Texas tells me that this is a variation of the retro bells. The Texas fans call these Taco Bells because this is KCS de Mexico. And for that matter, here's a Ferromex coming through Boyce. This appears to be an SD70 Ace. There are some regular visitors that we see some color on. One of the most noteworthy is Amtrak. And of course, Amtrak has gone through a number of paint schemes in its existence. This was during the transition between F40s and the Genesis P40 and the later 42 units, back when there were boxcar bridges at the crossovers in Clifton. Here's the heritage unit. It spent a lot of its time in the shop, but this is forwarding the consist for the new river trains. A lot of AM coaches and a bunch of private cars on the back. This is, near the road crossing in Clifton. I was very surprised. These two guys were working on the track. Judging by the alacrity with which they moved when this came into view, I'm not sure they've been advised it was coming. Here's the Midnight Blue unit, celebrating the people who work overnight various places, including on Amtrak, down in Culpeper. The Operation Lifesaver, quite colorful, very eye-catching. Also at Culpeper at a different time. The so-called Pepsi can scheme that was originated on the P32-8s that were often used on both the Sunset Limited and then later on Amtrak's Auto Train at one point. Now, here's something I didn't expect to see in orange: an electric locomotive, obviously with its pans down because there's nothing to reach for. You can see the PTC mast is already up and the structure for the new Darth Vader signals as well. But many of the ACS 64 Chargers moved between Chicago and Washington for forwarding to the shop in Wilmington via Amtrak's Cardinal. VRE, of course, since about 1990 has run on both the former RF&P and former Southern, in the latter case down to near the Manassas Airport. Here's the Manassas station. Period of a couple of years, they used a lease set of Bombardier equipment that were painted and lettered for the Seattle-Tacoma Sounder commuter service. They had one train set that actually ran on both lines at different times. Well, eventually they succumbed to the MPC 36s as well. Here's a nice foliage shot just west of Burke. There's a nice walking path here now that you can get right by the railroad. Hopefully the foliage is still permitting this. And now this would please passenger train advocates because it shows Amtrak Train 50, the Cardinal, flashing by a stopped freight train waiting for it to go. As we know, that doesn't always happen, but hey, they got their act together for this one. All right. There was an allusion to we would see some heritage units. Yes, we will, but we'll see some other things as well. Starting off with not a heritage unit, but some of you are familiar with the fact that Norfolk Southern was servicing the tourist area in Savannah, River Street. They were serving several industries over there, so that they painted up this locomotive to work in Savannah in special colors. And it actually played, it had a loudspeaker on it that played jazz music. That was, they didn't want to blow the horn because it literally was street running. And they would use that to get people out of the way. They later replaced it with this one. I don't know if this is an SW1500 or an MP15. This was the best I could do, but this was down in the NS yard in Savannah. Not many people remember that there was a Southern Green unit in the early 1990s. This is one of the GP59s. And this was at, I think, Rail Days in Manassas that year, along with a Southern business car. Well, sometimes the color is via the sun. Here's a nice glint shot of Manifest 11R heading south towards Boyce and beyond at Berryville in November. You can only do this shot and get this glint basically between late November and sometime in January. For a while, locomotives from GE, and there were several railroads had painting problems with GE in this era. So the Norfolk Southern took a number of locomotives in primer paint to get them in service soon. They ran in regular service in this garb. It's basically gray, but it has sort of a greenish tint. Maybe that's a function of how much sun is hitting it. Well, not really colorful, but hey, we'd all like to see these again. Classic, the Southern tuxedo scheme, yellow gold trim, and an ABBA set of F units. Here it is at White Post. The Southern purchased a bunch of SD50s, possibly also 60s, from the Union Pacific and put them in service without repainting, but with patch numbers. This is approaching the beginning of double track at Rapidan, south of Culpeper. Finally, the heritage units appeared. Now, I had no idea how we were going to find these things. The website heritage units didn't exist, and there were no Facebook groups at this point. But I did know that one was going to be at the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum. Wick Moorman was giving a talk, among other things, and drove up there it was a guaranteed appearance. And here it is being admired. Here's another shot. And that photographer in the wheelchair is actually wielding a real camera still. What's interesting to me here is that both Norfolk and Western and Pennsylvania used what was called Tuscan red. If you look at this, the Pensy unit, it's a shade towards, I'd call it brown. It's not really brown, but it is a different red. Now, the red that's on the Norfolk Southern car is like the former Norfolk and Western, but a little different from that too. So arguably, between the NS and the PRR, there probably have been at least 3 shades of Tuscan red, including the 2 shown here. This was the first chase I managed to make of a heritage unit on a road freight in this vicinity. Caught it first at Berryville and other places north, and was still in very nice shape. Central Georgia unit. Here it is on one of the trestles just north of the division point at Shenandoah. This was a surprise, and by this, Facebook groups have become fairly active. You can actually see, I think, what do we have here? 6 units. The 6th one is the Reading Heritage Unit. Well, this was basically honoring veterans. And it was going for an NS corporate event in Norfolk, where the headquarters were at that point. And it had put back it had been put back in the middle of the consist. Well, apparently the people in the Vardo yard, it could have been 1 or more were veterans, decided it would be a whole lot more appropriate to put it up front. So they did. And I was very glad to get this, and here it is, bright. You know, this is coming from Altoona where it was painted, so it was in great shape still. In addition to the Southern Heritage Unit, we've got the Savannah and Atlanta, and I guess that was a way to get the black tuxedo scheme into the Heritage fleet with a little bit of the red from S&A to give it a modest dose of color. This is right near the Cleveland Airport in Brook Park, Ohio. I was being advised by one of my friends in Virginia by phone of where this was. I was attending a meeting out there. Fortunately, the meeting let out. I dashed over to the spot. And then also, fortunately, train 21Q to the right barely got out of the way in time. That would have been infuriating if it hadn't happened, but we don't have to discuss it because it did not. So New York Central in the NYC Black Freight scheme with the lightning stripes just east of Front Royal. This unit looked good when it was new in its first use of the green and gold. I managed to chase it and get it the Bealton signals. Of course, this is a Southern unit going past what is clearly a Southern signal bridge. I have never understood completely what the Go Rail honors, except it's some sort of industry lobbying group, and it's still around. But here it is when it's nice and fresh and clean. That's at the nice spot in Markham that I mentioned previously. This also has the so-called Admiral cab, where the forward-facing cab windows are actually under what amounts to an awning, which helps keep some of the precipitation off. Here, if you need it, is a walking advertising for where digital photography can help you. This shot on Kodachrome would have been, you'll notice there's not full sun here. There's not really a shadow at all. There's a little bit of light. But by getting the sky out of the picture and using digital processing, it turned into a nice shot. It was another double header, this time the Wabash and the Southern together. This is up at the intermodal facility in Greencastle. Another one where I saw it both online and was worn by a friend out of town. Here's the Pensy unit on the former PRR at Newark, Georgia, waiting for now. One of the reasons they're holding back is because this is actually one of the few Amtrak trains that stops and works Newark. And the passengers have to get out and walk across the tracks. This is track A on the left, tracks 1, 2, and 3 to the right of it. And this is W6A, the extra section of 16A, waiting for the passenger train to do its work. Here's another look at it by itself. Now, would I have liked nose on the shot, light on the nose? Absolutely. Doesn't always happen, however. Here's the NYC unit waiting for a meet at Remington. The 6920 honoring the veterans, leading. I haven't seen it in this vicinity for quite a long time. Here's a former UP SD90 Mac that the NS is going to convert into its version of that kind of unit. Pensy unit still looking nice and clean in Thoroughfare west of Gainesville, Virginia. Friendly wave from the crew. This was a nerve-wracking chase. I knew this aircraft, sorry, other business that I'm in. This locomotive had been working locals out of Manassas and was going north on the one early in the morning on a rainy day. And I saw that it was leaving Manassas. I needed to get to Clifton, and I knew there was very little time. I actually put the settings together on this, stopped at a traffic light about a mile north of here, opened the door, jumped out, and got the shot. But it worked. And this is a nice, colorful unit. Here we are at Lee's Crossroads. Beautiful spot. I was just there yesterday looking at heritage units. This is a northbound empty hopper train behind the nickel plate. Went over to Marysville to get it on the Rockville Bridge, and it's now heading west towards Altoona and beyond. Known either as the Creamsicle or the Dreamsicle, this honors the interstate railroad that I bet very few people extant now actually photograph this Southern Railway, what became a Southern Railway subsidiary, personally. Sometimes with the lights, you got to do what you're able to. This is when the signal cutover was going on down at Winston. We've got the Lackawanna Heritage Unit. That's been up in Altoona for months. Supposedly it's getting overhauled and repainted, but there's been no activity that I've seen. Here it is in a little better light coming by White Post. This is the first of the so-called Blues Brothers, or the Sonic Bonnets, 4000 and 4001. The 4001 was wrecked not long after this and spent, I think, a couple of years waiting to be rebuilt. The original Savannah Norfolk Southern, not at Savannah. The original Norfolk Southern is held up pretty nice paint-wise. Here it is at Mitchell's again. There's a good-looking. I had mixed feelings. I'd already shot the Wabash several times. I actually wouldn't have minded if the Canadian Pacific ECO or Echo unit had led, because it was in great shape. Now, of course, it would have had to have been wide as well. Not a particularly colorful scheme, but no, it's not black and white. The Monongahela at Winston. This is the Norfolk and Western unit on historic Norfolk and Western rails, just south of the yard at Vardo at Hagerstown. Then later the same year at Cedarville, this is the train that was working the Virginia Inland Port at that time. And it met what was referred to as Barney. This was an ex-lease unit that the Canadian Pacific was operating out in Western Canada in its interchange service with the Union Pacific. The name came from there was a children's program featuring a purple dinosaur that was called Barney. Here is one of these in its earlier life out in Alberta on the prairie. Not too long after we got the Erie Heritage Unit on train 228. He's putting the train back together after working in Virginia Inland Port. Duncannon west of Harrisburg, another friendly wave from the Virginian, even a little dirty, is a nice colorful locomotive. And of course, then you got another hue of yellow in the form of the UP unit behind it. New York Central again west of Rectortown. This is Wenger's Feeds. Notice they have different kinds of structure for grain storage. I guess they were put up at different times. And here's the Virginian unit racing train 202 at that point, which was Memphis, Greencastle, and or Harrisburg. Not as much snow in recent times, but some opportunities to see heritage. And then we've also got a CP unit back there behind the original Norfolk Southern. Here's the famous cast in concrete, literally Southern Railway bridge over Virginia Route 55 between Front Royal and Linden. This is the training first responders train, which is in a scheme very similar to the 9/11, coming by First Rectortown. And here is well-known NS engineer Nick Pettit, also known as the King of the King of the Horn Show. Nick has described to me, he said when he was a kid, he always really liked it when the engineers blew the horn for him. So he's returning the favor now, and he's very good about doing that. He also likes to run. This one has been known as various things, including the glowworm, the Illinois Terminal Unit. This is approaching the intermodal terminal at Greencastle. Foggy day at Calverton with the Savannah, Atlanta, and then, well, the color is all behind it in the form of the BNSF units. Lehigh Valley unit at Thoroughfare heading west on the B line, 214, which unfortunately we've lost. It was pretty reliable in the late afternoon on the B and the H lines. This was actually the 20th of the original heritage units that I was able to photograph. This is the Sherman's Creek Bridge just south of Duncannon. After the 2-hour drive, I almost missed this, but fortunately got stabbed by a red signal and I was able to get it. These echo units are used, I think, primarily, this is in the Atlanta area and also Chicago. This is a, environmental, emissions lowering. And I don't know all the details of it, but they are in a very distinct scheme. Well, this was not the first time the 8099 had worked the OCS. Back in 2019, here it is going west on the B line. Now, this is in September, so it's obviously not coming from the Masters. It's the Conrail unit in a rainy day. This was back when crews were still being changed in Bristow, just south of Manassas. Manassas is no longer a crew base. Here is the interstate unit just west of Front Royal. This is west of the Woods interlocking, that is then double tracked down to Cody. Beautiful orange sunlight. It matches the locomotive on the left background as well. 4000 at Boyce. I've heard these referred to as the butter bonnets. It's a yellow version of the cab. There was also a red one. There was one of those. It didn't pan out. It's subsequently been sold. I never got a chance to shoot it. This is a shot. I actually would have been happier if the father and son had continued to play catch, but not bad human interest in any case with the Reading unit as a backdrop. Do you see the non-standard application? The Jersey Central Heritage Unit did not originally come with the googly eyes. They appear from time to time, courtesy of some railroad employee or another. You can see it plainly here. That as designed, that paint scheme was simply dark blue on the orange. There's several of these. This is what's called the red main. It's hard to make out, but just between the gray and the black, there's both red and blue. There's one other color as well. Nice morning shot coming across the Compton Trestle back in the spring of 2020. Another double opportunity with one of the yellow bonnet units and the Savannah in Atlanta, also at Lee's Crossroads. Interstate bringing 203 south, just this side. Well, when I say this side, I'm south of Berryville, so that's why I would call it that. Appearance got a little grimy as things went along. I guess that was another benefit of PSR. Keep the assets moving. Don't bother to wash them. Southern unit, I'm glad it was repainted. And this picture will give you a good idea of what that looked like 4 years ago. This was a colorful mashup. You had train 228 actually going around 15T, which was in the siding. And that, I think, is the original Norfolk Southern behind it. Now, you really can't call the Penn Central unit colorful. I'll give you that. Although this was one of, I think, the last 3 or 4 paint, apparently the paint was not given sufficient cure time because they needed to get these locomotives to Spencer, and it is subsequently peeled. But for the Penn Central, that's in character. Hey, this is we don't like to have our arm resting there and be running, wouldn't we? On a good day, I think there's still some fun to be had running a train. Now here we are. I think these two units, they're probably looking at each other and saying, you know, we're not in Cleveland anymore, are we? Because they would have seen each other there. This is basically just south of the railroad point of Antietam, north of the Potomac River. Same day, the Illinois terminal unit was in the picture as well. 9/11 returned to the Manassas area in the late summer of 2020 and was running on some of the longer distance locals. Caught this down at Catlett. You can get a good idea what the Admiral Cab looks like in this shot. Here's some Echo units heading north, probably for servicing. This was before the new home was built in Boyce. It would be difficult to get this precise shot anymore because the house is there. Beautiful late blast light on the Wabash unit coming south at Berryville. This is over off Happy Creek Road, east of Front Royal, between Woods, which is behind the train, and Cody, which is ahead of it. And these two shots were literally back to back by about a minute. Sometimes you get lucky. 4001 did come back to life eventually. And here it is at Markham. Better shot. No, this is the Virginian unit on the former NW with the former NW CPLs. They're still there, but they are coming north, and I have my doubts as to whether that shot will be whether that shot would be possible this fall or not. You can see here the googly eyes are not on Miss Liberty. Another double pair of Heritage. Rail fan Mike Severino making a video of the train. Again, this would be tough to do now, but this was a great place to do a pan shot of the Erie unit in the snow back in the winter of 2021.
So you're saying that somebody built a house right next to the railroad tracks?
Absolutely. That the person had owned the property for a long time. They are the front part of the house might be 15 or 20 feet from the boundary marker of the right of way. Yes. Take a good look when you go there next time. I'm trying to remember if I've included a shot of that. I'm not sure. Well, here's the area again the next spring with some nice roadside foliage. Norfolk Southern at Markham. The former town manager, Boyce, he's now retired, Dave Winsat, has a big garden. Now, his house is well, it's near the tracks, but it's offset further, and it also faces, it's 90 degrees different. It actually was the section manager's house for the N&W back in the day. And Dave's wife grew up in that house because her dad worked for the N&W. But here are his scarecrows from a couple seasons ago. And isn't this typical of human nature? Well, one guy's out doing the roll by, but look, the other one is taking his ease and, you know, leaning backwards here. Now, I'm not sure if this has scared that many birds, but it sure made for a nice picture. Again, another shot of the 4001. The cornfield, the field shot at White Post, if corn is planted, you lose several months a year because you can't see much. This was a day of multiple Heritage units on both the RF&P, and then the Jersey Central came up the former Southern as well. Ran into a number of friends on that day. Bill, I think you may have chased that. Well, here's a one unit move with some color. I think this practice is now ended, but at the beginning of the Virginia legislative session, which is only every 2 years, the Norfolk Southern would take this is one of its business cars that does not have sleeping accommodations, or at least possibly with the exception of a crew member. It's basically simply for entertainment. They parked it on a siding in downtown Richmond to entertain the politicians. And here it is being moved from Altoona. behind a single SD70 Ace, which I think has plenty of tractive effort and horsepower to make this move. Here's one of the car. There are two of these. They're called the Brick. They were built on former locomotive frames, I think SD35s. They're painted in Tuscan red. This is the track geometry train, and as you can see, it's pulled by a regular locomotive. This is laying up on the siding in the town of Front Royal for the evening. There's Wick Mormon Sandy Creek we saw earlier in service with the American Orient Express. This was on the train to the Masters 2 years ago. Here's the rear end. Now, if you're familiar with the town called Buena Vista in Rockbridge County, yes, it is pronounced that way. And yes, it was also named for the Battle of Buena Vista in the Mexican War. Well, the Southern had long had this theater car, and it was referred to as the Buena Vista. Now, that basically that's Spanish for beautiful view. Well, of course, if your section of track is being observed out the rear end of this thing, you better hope the view is beautiful. But I've heard increasingly even railroad people now who've called this the Buena Vista now that we have the Norfolk Southern, not just the Southern. By the way, I've looked up the basic frame of this car is about 100 years old. It was built as, I believe, a heavyweight Pullman. Obviously, many parts of it are newer than that, including the trucks. Oh, our latest, it is colorful. This is that exotic commodity municipal waste from the Northeast, New York, and New England, also known as trash. Sometimes these don't get full lighting, but it's pleasant anyway. And here's the CFG unit coming through Boyce near the end of 2022 one evening. The Reading unit, I think, was the first one of the batch to get fully repainted. Here it is just about a year ago, down south of the Virginia Inland Port. Well, sometimes the trains on NS are colorful. This is what's known in railfan circles as the Candy Cane Herzog train. It's red and off-white. This is out in Bellevue, major Norfolk Southern terminal out in northwestern Ohio.
That trash train looked like it had MSC containers.
Yes, those are former 40-foot ocean shipping containers. Notice at the top, they have it's sort of like it looks like it's a rubberized tarp.
So no longer used on ships.
No, it is used just for trash, and they're top loaded. One of my friends, Greg DeBurra, actually photographed one of these using his drone. That the tarp had torn off. You could see all the trash in it. This was while it was on the road.
Wasn't Bellevue also a New York Central division point or something back in the day?
I'm sorry, what was?
What Bellevue, wasn't that a New York Central division?
No, that was the big nexus of the nickel plate.
Yeah, definitely nickel plate.
Oh, okay.
Well, but to put together the N&W Wabash nickel plate merger, the N&W purchased the Pennsylvania's Columbus, Ohio to Sandusky line. That also intersects at Bellevue. So you've got both former Pennsy heritage and nickel plate. It is a hopping place. Now, of course, that was one of the ones that as soon as they announced PSR, they took out the hump. I don't know if that's been put back yet or not. All right. You got good visibility here, although it could blend in with the background. But here's the nickel plate unit heading south last fall. Pan shot of the Lehigh Valley. And just recently, here we have many shades of green looking across the field at White Post. This is right behind this scene is a major dairy farm, and this is grass that is it's about to be harvested now for the cattle back there. And did chase the OCS on April Fool's Day after everybody got over the fact that there was no fooling here. Southern unit looks great, as does the Virginia. This is coming past Rectortown, and just to the left here is the bridge that you can't cross anymore. Supposedly by the end of May, it will be back in service. Now, I am commanding a drum roll we're done. We're done with the presentation, and this is a combo that is really hard to beat for color. Not only the locomotives, but you got color back in the train too. Look, thanks for paying attention and joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, and be happy to talk with you for a bit and entertain any questions. Thank you.
Very good.
Thanks,
Very good.
John. Excellent
Thank you.
program.